All right, now we're going to move on to the next phase, which is putting piston rings on these pistons, and we're going to get those seated in the block. And of course, after doing that, put the connecting rod bearings in and get all that stuff assembled so we can try to get the short block portion of this thing wrapped up. But as you can see here, I got everything more or less laid out. All the piston rings, got 3 of these solid rings right here and a set of these funny looking rings right here. Got our connecting rod bearings right there, and we have some instructions right there, and some oil and pistons, all that other good stuff. So yeah, we're gonna start with each piston, taking all the old rings off and putting the new stuff on. But on a side note, since we're not assembling a high performance engine here, we're not going to go through the time to file the gap on the rings. I'll just do a quick check just to verify the gap on the rings, just to kind of satisfy my own curiosity. But for all intents, I'm probably not going to be grinding the gap on the rings to make them a little bit wider or anything, since again, this is not a performance engine. This is just a plain old stock engine. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started. The instructions are pretty good here as far as really showing you how to orient the rings, as far as identifying things like a dot on the left side of the gap and a mark that shows where the top is at, and other fine details, as you could clearly see right there. Everything you need to know if you've never really assembled an engine before or don't know the terminology. So of course you can find all that stuff online, but the manufacturer was nice enough to put this information in the package with everything. So here it is. All right. To satisfy my curiosity, I'm gonna actually do a piston ring gap check. The way most people do this, they'll take their piston ring, as you can see here, got your engine block, and what we're going to do is carefully place the ring into the cylinder first. Get it in there. If you probably noticed, I already caked this thing with some oil to aid in placement. Now, what most people will do to ensure that the thing is actually in there, they'll take a piston, these are flat top as you can see, and they will push this piston ring in about an inch. Push in about an inch here, give or take, since the piston is obviously going to fit perfectly straight into the cylinder wall here. When you pull it out, the piston ring should be seated in a way where you know the thing is in there properly. Now, take our feeler gauge. We're going to open it up to one of the larger sizes here. Now, the specs for this engine state that the gap should be around 10 to 20 thousandths of an inch. So we're just gonna, for the heck of it, take this 25, since this is the smallest one on this particular part of the feeler gauge. We're just going to see where we stand. Now, I put it in here. Let's get the camera here where we could sort of kind of focus better. And that 25 thousandths is actually going in there pretty decently without no real play. Now, even though this is 25 thousandths and the tolerance says 10 to 20, one thing you got to take into account is expansion because of engine heat. Now, granted, the manufacturer probably has 10 to 20 thousandths to give you a good window of expansion opportunity for the rings when they heat up. Now, at the same time, because this ring gap is a little bit above that tolerance, you might think, okay, what are you going to do? But at the same time, also got to take into account that despite that possible loss of pressure, cylinder pressure, you also have the opportunity to be able to add a little more horsepower without having to take into account that your piston rings need to be gapped before you put your engine together. So for all intents and purposes, we do have the potential to maybe add a little bit more horsepower by doing some little bolt-on mods in the future without worrying about piston ring gap, because, well, the gap is already gapped a little bit more. So with that being said, we should be ready to rock and roll on assembly. Your old pistons are probably gonna have a bunch of crap in there, carbon, whatever. Now, I did the best I could cleaning these pistons out using a broken piston ring, which we got right there, using it to scrape out the grooves to get as much trash out as possible. And I'm sure somebody's gonna say, well, they do it this way, they do it that way, I use this machine, blah blah blah, whatever, I pressure wash it, yada yada yada. Okay, that's good. You use that stuff for your engine overhauls and I'm sure you get good results. But again, we're doing a simple little backyard rebuild here where this engine is going to, for all intents, be stock, maybe slightly modified with no real super duper power add-ons. And besides, it's not going to be a permanent setup because we still got that engine there to put in the future, the one that was in the car. That one we will probably go through extra effort to make sure that everything is straight. But in the meantime, we're just going to put piston rings on this stuff right here and start putting it into the block there so we can start getting this engine more assembled instead of just having a pile of parts all over the place. So we were going to get started. Oh, and another thing too, I'll get into it later, but these piston rings here, you got your oil rings, you got your top, your middle rings, and then these are the other parts of the oil ring assembly, which is actually a 3-piece setup. And I'm going to go ahead and take care of that in a second. But I'm going to look at something here just for show and tell. On this manual right here, it kind of shows you when you're assembling everything how to orient the oil rings first of all. And right here in particular, it shows you where to put the gaps for the oil ring setup there. You know, you have probably about a I don't know, 60 degrees. No, yeah, about 30, 40 degrees maybe apart from one another, since you have 2 rings for each setup. That would mean you'd have to have it about like that in the piston. And then of course you have the little curly piece midways there. You can see all that right there. You could pause it, read it, whatever. These are just the simple instructions that came with everything again. So I'm gonna go ahead and start assembling some of this crap. Take the middle piece, put it on first, then take that one. And work that sucker on there. Of course, you got to be a little careful with it because you don't want to break the ring. The last thing you want to do is break the ring. So we're going to get that sucker in there. Okay, let's see, we got that one on there. Let's get the bottom one on there. We're going to get it a little wet there. Then we'll go ahead and start working that one into the groove. And bam, there we go. Now we're going to orient everything according to the diagram. Now, got to find where the little spot was for the middle ring. I see that. There you are. Hold on, let's move that one. And where's our other one? There you are. Work this thing around. Okay, get it in the position. Okay, we got the oil ring set up. Got the joint right there for the middle one. Got the top one right here. And the bottom one right there, oriented as intended. Now, we're going to do our middle ring, which, if you notice, is just a straight ring with no taper on one end or the other. Gonna wet that up a little bit. Get it nice and oily. And then we're going to do the same thing. Since these don't have a taper, orientation doesn't matter. Even the manufacturer didn't bother putting any kind of markings on there to indicate top or bottom. So slowly work these on. Of course, you got to be careful with these because these here will break real easily if you're not careful. A little bit of crap on my hands. It's always a good thing to make sure your hands are indeed clean. And you also got to take your time because these things are sharp as hell. And you will cut yourself big time if you're not careful. So now we got that little number snapped on. Now it says in most manuals to have the top and middle rings oriented 90 degrees. So as you could see, we got the gap right here. That means 90 degrees around. We'll put the top ring right there. Since this top ring is already gooped up with oil, I'm gonna go right on and snap it in. Now, This ring does have a little taper on it, and it's got a marking on it with a dot. Let's see if we could focus in on this real quick. There's a dot right there that indicates the top. So that's how we have to orient this thing, on the top. So back here, we got the top. Get that dirt off there, because there will be some dirt on there, but that's why we have our oil. So I'm going to go ahead and slip this number in, top. And same thing as before. Work it on slowly until you get it in there, and bam, middle, top, 90 degrees, and bam, piston number 1 is done. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of them, which I'll spare you the boredom of watching me do the same thing 7 more times and listening to my ass. So I'll go ahead and get that done real quick, and then we can move on to actually putting pistons into the engine. Cut! Alright, we got all the pistons ringed up. As you can clearly see, everybody's got their rings on. Got a mess right here. Even have a couple extra piston rings, which the manufacturer was nice enough to give, because I guess they expect somebody to break a ring or two. So I have extra rings because I did not break a ring or two. Now, at this point, we can start putting in the connecting rod bearings, at least the bottom part, and start knocking some pistons into that little thing right there. All right, if you hadn't really caught earlier in a past video, I had these pistons set up like this because I'm keeping them in an orientation to indicate which piston goes to which cylinder on the engine block right there. And that is because you want to put everything back exactly the way you pulled it out. So as you could see, this would be the front of the engine. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. As stated before, got the rings on. Also have my piston ring compressor tool. And what that thing does is it wraps around the piston, squeezes the rings in flush, and allows you to tamp the whole piston into the cylinder wall. So, or into the cylinder, against the cylinder wall. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. So, this here, number 1. I'm going to take that. The first thing we got to do, I'll have to really do it where I could set up the camera and demonstrate. But take this little number right here, put it on. I like to try to get it flush against the top, and then when it's in position, go ahead and lock it down. Now these things are adjustable for your different pistons, different diameter pistons, but as you can see, let me get it straighter. Sometimes you have things that require 3 hands, but yeah, get it a little straighter right there. But right there is how that works. All the piston rings are compressed against it, ready to rock and roll. Now the next thing is having a mallet. We will get that in a second. In the meantime, though, as far as putting the piston in, if you haven't noticed, there's a little dimple on top of the piston. That also tells you what direction to put the piston in. Since this is the front of the engine, that dimple says that goes to the front. So we're going to situate that like that. Try to get this where it's not going to just fall over while I go get my mallet. Mallet. Okay, yeah, right. Anyway, back over here. As stated, the front with the dimple. I'm gonna go ahead, get this bearing cap off. Yep, gonna do it all one-handed. I'll do the rest of them. Gonna set that aside right there temporarily. Then what we're gonna do, take the piston and we're gonna go ahead and place it into the cylinder like so. And as you can see, still oriented to the front. Gonna also have to turn that crank so we can have that portion down. Now the next thing is tapping time. Take our trusty mallet and gradually bam. As I was tapping it, you probably heard some little metal snaps. That was the rings popping out from the compressor tool and situating themselves after going into the cylinder wall. Now, come up underneath. You can also notice that that little number there did situate itself. Now I am gonna have to rotate this crank again so I can get the bearing in place. But point is, that is what is involved with putting the piston in. Now, go ahead and get the rest of this done. Grease the rest of these cylinder walls up, and we are going to get that going just as well. Before we get the rest of the pistons in, as stated before, we're going to get the connecting rod bearings in. As you can see here, we got a couple of them soaking in oil. Got the bottom cap there. I'm going to go ahead and put that one bearing into the cap. Then we're going to go ahead and rotate this engine around along with the crank, get the other one in, and we're going to get everything locked together, but not torqued down yet. So I'm going to go ahead and take our little cap right here. The caps, just like everything else, get a little dirt on there, but yeah. But this one still actually has an old bearing in there, which has not been pulled. But on the cap right there is a little dimple right there, just like with the not connecting rod, with the crank bearings for placement of our bearing. Locks in place like so. Now, go ahead and move all this stuff out of the way. And we are going to rotate this engine around. That's all I'm doing that. And rotate the crank a little bit. As you can see, we have that spot. And from the way it looks like that has an old bearing too. Let me rotate this some more because I need it to be in position. Got that little number out of the way. And same thing, we're going to take that. Looking in there. Pretty much going to be in the same situation as far as the groove and all that good shit. You know, place our bearing in there. Then we're going to rotate back around and catch that little number right there. Then take our bearing cap and put it with dimple side on the same dimple side there, which will have it like that. Get our nuts and put those on. Like I said, we're not going to torque them down, we just need them snug. Of course, dropping nuts does not help. Yep, nut recovery. Try this again. Okay, we got them on. I'm going to have to get a tool and get them a little snug. All right. Got our 9/16 on there. Get this a little snug down, but not torqued down. Just need it where it's not going to flop around much. A little bit more oil in that piston right there to help give the wall a little more lubrication. And then I'm going to rotate this a little bit. 1 1/4 inch wrench on there. Get a little oil on there. Keep the cylinder walls nice and lubricated. But as you can see, everything rotates. Go ahead and do it again. Number 1 is ready for torquing. After we get everything else done, we can get the whole thing buttoned up on the piston end. connecting rod bearings are in. Now we can finish putting the remainder of these pistons into the block. Let's get that going. As with the main bearing caps that are already on here, we also have to torque down the connecting rod nuts. Since we got 8 pistons, 2 of them is piston, that's 16 nuts we got to do all together. The specs say 45 foot-pounds of torque. So we went ahead, got our trusty torque wrench set. We could go ahead and torque that down. Do a couple of them just for demonstration purposes, and go ahead and do the rest of them off camera. Alright, got a few of them done now. I am going to go ahead and test rotate the crank just to make sure everything is still straight, and go ahead and continue to get the rest of them done. Alright, we got everything tightened down, torqued like it's supposed to, and going ahead, spinning the crank. As you can clearly see, pistons move up and down in each cylinder like they're supposed to, with no binding, just simple sliding of metal components. Of course, I'll have to lube up everything a little bit better so during the first startup we don't risk doing any premature wear of these components while actually running everything. But as you can clearly see, the bottom end is just about done. On the piston side, all of that is done. We can start moving on to other components of this engine.